In that case, please, a round of applause for Mink Ette and Arlo Howard. Thank you.
Hello, AdventureX.
Hey.
So we are here to speak to you today about escape rooms, but we thought since all of you, like who here is a storyteller? Can I have a show of hands? Yeah. So we thought we'd try and focus on what we thought would be most interesting for you, because we've only got a short amount of time. So here are different places where we think that storytelling intersects with the different aspects of escape rooms.
And a lot of this is coming from our knowledge as makers and also from chatting with other people in industry. Hey, these are our faces and our names. Gorgeous. So I'm Arlo Howard. I use they, them pronouns. I come from a theater background into games, so I work a lot at the intersection of theater and games. Sometimes it's theater with playful elements, and sometimes it's escape rooms, and sometimes it's a phone-based adventure.
And I am Mink Ette, and I have mostly been making escape rooms for the last 10 years. Before that, I also made alternate reality games, board games, occasionally computer games, not so much, but a lot of of looking at different ways of telling stories through playful interactions.
Gorgeous. So the first sort of intersection of storytelling and escape room we want to chat about is the idea of storytelling through space. Who could tell me what this is, what this world is? Yeah, we've got some giggles and some hands. We've got Star Wars. So one of the things that George Lucas always talked to his creative teams about was the sort of 5-second rule. Within 5 seconds, we want to be able to tell us a Star Wars. He's not the only person with this idea, but he's a person who has this idea. So one of the experiences that I recently made was called Order of the Golden Scribe. And we had this spooky eye thing as soon as you entered the space, because I needed to create a space in which you understood the world that we're playing in pretty quickly. And so I was pulling on this sort of Illuminati zeitgeist that exists of ooh, eyes are spooky and there's something about these rays. And then sort of throughout the space, we repeated this symbol quite a lot, and we had our facilitators, our performers, our actors, whatever you want to call them, in these sort of culty pajama costumes. So that as soon as you enter, you get this idea instantly, okay, I'm in some sort of weird Illuminati sort of space. There are definitely secrets happening, and then the whole game becomes about you uncovering those secrets.
And you might recognize this game as well. This is, so we just wanted as an example, in Gone Home, the environmental storytelling there of, you really get a sense that even though you're not physically, there aren't people that you can see in the space, you can see the detritus of their lives, their ephemera, and you get a real sense of the characters and the people that inhabit that space. And then that can further the story, that can lead you to things, that can further the story. Yeah, if we go to the next one. So also, in an escape room scenario, you have these things as props and as set pieces. So you, as you can see, this is from the game. The game is Now. It's a Sherlock-themed game where they have meticulously recreated the sets from the TV series. But then also, you're playing a game, you can actually be in that space and try and guess what was Sherlock thinking, guess what were we doing by intuiting from the environment.
And then if anybody knows Punch Drunk, that is sort of on the theater end of doing this, where you might have a space that you feel oh, someone's just left this. There's papers left on the table, a pencil, or if anyone saw the Burnt City, which I worked on, there was this child's bedroom, so you've got toys, so that feeling of a space that's lived in by a character, so you can learn about them. So that's on the theater end of the idea of environmental storytelling.
You also have a control over the actual physical space, unless you're doing something really site-specific. How you get your audience to move from space to space to space. Who here has done an escape room? Yay, a forest of hands. If you can think of that moment where not every single escape room has it, but in quite a lot of escape rooms, that moment when you realize there's a second room, opening that second door, and like that excitement of transitioning through that liminal space of like walking through a doorway, and how that actually feels like not only a success, but you are progressing through the time, through the plot, as well as through physical space. And one of the things that action is doing is, as we all know from computer games, is gating content. But we're actually kind of thinking of it more as like in such a kind of physical sense of that, whilst you're embodied in the game, that you don't really think about it as like, oh, I've unlocked a door and therefore I've got a new world to play with, but more that kind of excitement of unlocking a thing. So this game is by Clue Capers. And it is a game that you take on a little trolley around the centre of Winchester, and based on, so you can see like that we've got the maps and things here because we didn't play this game actually in Winchester, so she brought Winchester to us by printing it out. And so you navigate around this parkland where all these like historic buildings are, and by solving each of these trays has got puzzles which are like buttons and levers and basically locks. You solve the puzzle and then you get to physically move that tiffin box section out and get into the next area, which then leads you to move to another part of Winchester. So I think this is such a nice way of embodying the idea, not necessarily of just gating content and then you move into it, but also unlocking more puzzles.
Another great example of the revelation of space is Meow Wolf. Does anyone know about Meow Wolf? Yes, amazing. So in the House of Eternal Return, you come up to this house and it looks like a normal house on the outside, and the more you go in, you discover that things are a bit weird, and you might go into like the laundry room and oh my gosh, the washing machine opens and it's actually a slide full of socks. Or the refrigerator opens and it's this portal into the other world. So the idea that you can create story through revealing new things about the space that we think, oh, this is quite normal. But as we go through, we discover, oh, actually there's something weird and different happening here, and moving through space to further that story.
And also thinking about space, there's also kind of the pragmatics and planning around how do you utilize your space. So this is a map kind of an escape room that we made called the Dyson Smart Room, where each section of the escape room, there weren't multiple rooms, they were all overlapping in the same space. And so we had to meticulously plan out to make sure that none of the puzzles the clues were going to get confused by each other by being in the same space. Also being aware and thinking about where are my players physically standing? Can they all actually physically stand close enough, like in this same spot, to be able to interact with the thing we need them to? So this was very much kind of like mapping out where will they be in space and in time, also in narrative.
Yeah, what I loved about this as well is it's like, even though you did it for a room that was like all on top of each other, it could absolutely be applied to any sort of design. And that's like in the world of like making immersive theater, we think quite a lot about how we move people through space and how they know where to go and when to go places. And quite frequently, lighting design can be used as a storytelling tool as well, of like finding how do you illuminate a space to tell people, okay, this would be a great direction to go, and make spaces darker, that you want to encourage people, okay, this is maybe not so much an interesting place to be right now.
That reminds me, actually, we also, in one of the escape rooms that we made, we tried to make sure that every time that a puzzle culminated and everyone gathered together, that they were dramatically lit. So, because we know in the story where they're going to be, so we could do that cinematic, dramatic lighting to make them look as cool and filmic as possible, to really use that lighting to highlight you guys are in this world, and like, yeah, it looks awesome.
And feels rad.
Yeah.
These are sort of the top tips that we've just covered of things to think about when you're thinking about how you tell story with space.
So we thought you could just photograph that if you want. Also, I forgot to mention at the beginning, so this logo in the top corner is, so with our interviewing people and everything, we wanted to expand our research and also expand sharing what we discover. So we're starting a podcast looking at the different aspects of game design, of escape room design, but also other forms of game design. So this little kind of cliff note up in the corner is how we're kind of thinking about how we're presenting our findings and things of
like knowledge sharing.
Yeah, so that is make your own escape is the logo.
Rad. So the next sort of things we like to think about in escape rooms is puzzles. There's loads of puzzles. We can use them to tell stories, I bet. So I don't know if anybody knows Lab Rat. This is an escape room based in LA, and one of the things they do with their puzzles is they've set the tone off the bat of this is absurd and nonsensical and wonderful. So as soon as you enter, you are cast as the lab humans for these giant rat scientists. And, well, you're quite dumb because you're just dumb little lab humans, but let's see if you can solve any of these lab tests that we have for you. So that tone is set really early by, like, the site, by the puzzles, there's a series of pathways that feel like a maze, and all along the maze are these posters of just animal puns of different like movies and video games and stuff. So it's really setting the tone for what your experience in this game is going to be. One of the other things that they do, and I think a lot of rooms do, is they find a way to get everyone to pay attention for these milestone moments. So if there's ever an important bit of storytelling that you're wanting to do in creating a room, you can create a puzzle that makes everybody look in the same space or pay attention to the same thing so that we understand what's happening. In this game, it was, we all had to run around and there was like information on this end and information on this end, and we had to communicate it back and forth, which made everybody pay attention to the big story plot that was next revealed. Sometimes people do this with like, there's 6 buttons that need to be pushed simultaneously. But thinking of ways to make everybody pay attention to, if there's story, that's a great place for that to live. Doors of Divergence. This is an amazing escape room that has just lost their space in Brooklyn. Hopefully they'll come back. They do great work they've got live performers, which is an incredible thing. We'll talk more about that later. But one of the things that they're doing with their puzzles is you're learning about the characters in the world through the puzzles themselves. So this is from Madness 1917, and what they've done in that game is there's like scrawls on the wall that you later find out were written by one of these characters that you've met at the beginning, and you learn about their obsession with music from these things. So using puzzles not just as like devices to get out of the room that you're locked in, but also as a way to tell story. The Nest is also a great example of that leans much more into theater, but it's all about learning about who this character is.
And who here has seen Kurt Vonnegut's story graphs before? Yeah, excellent. About half the room. So half of you are in for a great treat. If you go to YouTube, you might have heard of it. Anyway, if you go to YouTube, Kurt Vonnegut himself does this talk. There's a video of him talking through what he describes as a story graph. So we had earlier the talk about the 3-act structure, and you might look a bit familiar here. But one of the things that I took away from this is the idea. So in this chart, we've got good fortune at the top, bad fortune at the bottom, and then these lines are like the plot going through, like the main character's journey through it. So, for example, you've got Cinderella there, a jaggedy line because things get pretty bad, then they get incrementally better, then she has an amazing night, then midnight strikes, everything goes bad, but ultimately she gets a happy end at the end. He's marked that as good fortune and bad fortune. I was also thinking of what else could you map? Could you map emotional tension? So if you were to think of different genres and different, for the difference between a thriller and a horror. So a thriller is more like we would say like a roller coaster. The emotional tension goes up and down and up and down. You need those, it can't be constantly up. You need those low points, those bathos points to highlight that emotional tension again. Because if you're on a roller coaster that only goes up, that's just a plateau, that's just a train that's up high. You need it to go up and down to get the emotional responses. So, and likewise with if you look at like how horror works, like there is that building up of emotional tension, and then like a jump scare, or like something, more, that's the most kind of basic one, or like, but something that's like the working up of tension, and then the release, and then you need it to build up again. So I think that there's something you can do that with, because puzzles give an emotional, because your player is actively doing something, they have an emotional response to it. By choosing which puzzles to use when, you can kind of create that roller coaster to fit the genre that you're trying to be part of. And you had a great point about if you make people all stand close to each other. If you make people all stand really close up next to each other, that's really tense. Like you get really anxious if you're forced to stand next to each other. So you can just like make your, like for a moment of like high tension, just ram them all really close so that they're stuck together, and then let them disperse again. So like through that space you can also control their emotions, and that feeds into everything else.
Yeah, and from a theater perspective, we think about that. It's like theatrical blocking, and how do you block the actors in the space, and like the breathing of like moments of high tension, then we have an exhale, and then we come in and out. And in that idea of like how we can sort of like borrow that bit of like theatrical storytelling into escape rooms. We talk a lot about like scaffolding in interactive and immersive theater, about how do you teach people how to play by saying like, okay, the first puzzle you're gonna do might be like a bit easy. Okay, great, we now know what kind of things we're looking for, how we get to play together in this room, and then you can sort of ramp it up from there. And one thing that you talked about before was that final puzzle.
Yeah, because for your emotional tension, and I guess because if you are following that now completely debunked 3-act structure of the ejaculation point, and anyway, if you're ramping up things at the end of your game, it is really tempting to just make the last thing super hard. But that's not actually so if you're reading a book, the last thing you do is close the book and put it down. If you read a book and think, oh, that was great, I got really good to the end, I got the denouement, got the story, but now this book's stuck to my hand and I can't get out of here because my hand's glued to a book. So that the very last puzzle that you do is actually just got to be super easy. You've got to finish your story and then let them have that catharsis, but also let them actually just have an easy win, gather them all together and actually just hit a big red button together. It shouldn't be hard, the last thing you do. That it should be the triumph moment. Don't get in the way of that triumph moment.
Amazing. This is one of those slides again, if you want it. I think we covered it.
Yeah, I think we've covered everything.
Right. 5 more seconds. Here we go. All right. Now we have storytelling via facilitation. So we're talking about if you have live performers, if you have games masters, these sorts of things. So I did this project called The Liminal House of the Adjudicate with Epic Immersive in San Francisco. And basically I was given the space and I could not make any edits to the space. But I had one game facilitator, who you see here, and a bunch of tiny rooms. So one of the things that I realized in my play testing is even though I told them at the beginning, please do not move on until you are told to, people are not so good at listening sometimes. And so people just squirreled through the entire thing and were like, wow, that was really fast. I'm not really sure what happened. And I was like, okay, great, that's really good for me to learn, is the idea of if there's something really important, you need people to know, whether it is physical, how to play instructions, or important story points, you've got to repeat them. And so like I found that with this one, what I ended up doing is I repeated it 3 times, and then I also did like the extra thing of having them repeat it back to the facilitator, because then if they've said it, then they've definitely heard it. And it's such a simple thing, but we built it into this character as she was like the holder of this space, and you've all just, you enter in the space down a slide into the afterlife. And so you've just entered the afterlife, and this is the adjudicate, and she's going to tell you how to behave in this world. And so her character was designed in a way that she could do that really clear instruction giving, because we didn't have as much control over the space and the spatial storytelling.
I also just wanted to have a quick moment to talk about the difference between a clue and a hint. So these words can be used interchangeably, but there's also like where the GM or the game master sits within this is that the relationship between how the players react to the idea of clues and hints. So most people will go into an escape room and they'll be like, we don't want any hints, never give us any hints, never tell us anything. And which is fair, I do that as well. I'm also willing to take hints if I need them. So how I would like to define this, and it's like how I personally define the difference between a clue and a hint, is a clue is something that was part of the game. It was built in. This is when you design your puzzle, these are the tools that you're giving your player to be able to solve your puzzle. And because those are built in and inherent and part of the world, they are like essentially diegetic to the world you've created. Hints, most people think of them as something that's being laid on afterwards because you are failing. Because as the player, you don't want a hint because you don't want that stigma of like, oh, I suck at this puzzle, I needed to be helped. So the idea of a hint is something that is it's a fourth wall break, and it makes them kind of almost reject the GM as well a bit, of like, oh God, they had to come in and tell me how to do the thing. So this is like an interesting kind of little puzzle place, or rather a little problem to solve within the industry at all. And so, there's some potential solutions that people have made. We've got, this is again in the Dyson room that we made. One of the tasks, so this escape room's theme was creative technology and the connected home. So like the most kind of common thing that most people will know from a connected home environment is an Alexa. So we had this unnamed, unbranded Alexa voice that was in the room. And so a lot of the clues involved, a lot of the tasks involved just asking Alexa, talking to the smart room assistant. And because that was diegetic, that was built in, the players never really saw a difference between just asking for clues, which were part of it, and getting hints. They didn't feel like it was a stigma. It felt like a legitimate and non-admission of failure to just ask, like, am I supposed to be pressing this? Because that was the correct thing to do in both situations. So they didn't think there was a hint system in that game when actually there was. And then
and this is just another example, quite similar. This is Last Supper at Quest Tavern, which is just outside of LA. And basically in this room, you're going to a dinner with this mysterious person who's started acting really strangely. Turns out he's been possessed by a demon and is now a cannibal. So you've got a live actor who's in the room with you, having dinner with you, and then later you hear his voice again, but it's disembodied, and it's actually the spirit of the man who's been possessed, and he really wants to get out, so he's here to help.
Wanted to specifically call out Judgment Dave by Bewilderbox, which is an escape room in Brighton, where they have this avatar, this computer, so the Dave, as a kind of a flip on the 2001, this AI computer is this character that's in the game, is in the room, is kind of chatting and bantering, giving you hints. but also you end up actually, the narrative of the game ultimately affects making a choice about this character's well-being. And so, the GM is not physically present in the room. They are still like outside of the room, but the GM's voice and their character is here, and you are still interacting with that character in the space and making choices about his life, and it just makes that character far more involved and important. Again, somewhat removing the fourth wall. And of course, like Crystal Maze. I think we've hopefully all heard of Crystal Maze. Like 50% of the reason that you're there is the host. Like, that is the character. You're there for this kind of one-on-one performance that's just for you. There are puzzle rooms, and like there's the fun and like hanging out with your friends. But if that GM was somewhere like hidden away in a room and just like giving you clues over a microphone, that would be a completely different experience. Like there is a way to just like actually just put that character, that actor, performer right in the center of the experience.
It's one of those slides again. So this is the end, so I'll leave this for a few more seconds. And then the next slide is going to be like, hey, if you want to learn more about making escape rooms and hear chats with all of like the smart people we're talking to, you can sign up to our email list, and we'll pop you an email when we've got the podcast up. So if you're interested, find Making Your Escape. You'll learn about what smart people think about making escape rooms. Is that everything?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you all so much.
Thank you very much, Mink and Arlo. We have time, perhaps, for one question, if there is. I see a hand.
Hi, that was a great talk, thank you. So I've done a few escape rooms myself. I've been in a range of number of people that have taken part, from like 2 people to 6 people. So obviously you're trying to make an escape room for an unknown number of people. And I've been in escape rooms where it's felt like, you know, that they're kind of saying there's too many cooks spoil the broth kind of thing. But then on the flip side, it's a case of there's too many different things to do. And maybe you don't you're not aware of what the solution to a puzzle was for something that you weren't involved with because you were focused on something else. So how do you kind of navigate and get that balance between making sure people keep track of the story, but then also they're not all trying to do the same thing and therefore feel quite restricted and overwhelmed?
So I say the question is kind of about how to scale the content to fit the different group size. So I see you're backing away. Okay. I would say that that is a really thorny and difficult design question, and it's kind of on the designers to think about this as part of it, because if you're making a game that you can have different quantities of people come in, it's just a good idea and good practice to try and think about how are you going to meter out the content, the puzzles, so that everyone is occupied. Make sure that they're all focused at the right time, together. So I think if you've got a large group of people, splitting them apart and putting them on different paths, that it is mutually they don't need to know exactly what the content of one person's puzzle over there, but knowing the fruition. So if you have some kind of meta puzzle, so for example, if you have a meta puzzle, let's say there are 4 empty spots on a mantelpiece, you split the group into 4, and then they can all work in parallel on something, but then come back together. No one of those subgroups is going to get left behind if you make sure you kind of make these checkpoints, bring people back together by having meta puzzles. And then the main thing is that they know, the third bit is missing from 3 out of 4 is done. You've got this kind of progress bar. So there's a lot of we'll do a whole episode on that. It's a big question, and yeah, I guess the quick TLDR answer is just like probably parallel paths that come back together and just weave things.
I've also seen it done really well in terms of like getting story across in Hope End, which is a game in LA. In that game, there's a part where you're trying to solve a bunch of different deaths, and at the end of each solve, you have this moment where it's like there's like big lights change, a video that plays, so you get the story that other people have solved in their bit of puzzle. So that idea of like, there's a dramatic change in the space, you've directed everyone's attention here, so it makes people go, what the is happening? I'm gonna look at what's happening over here. So you can use theatrics in tandem with the puzzles. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mink Ette and Arlo Howard.